Well, thank you so much for everyone coming today. This is our second Healthcare Entrepreneur Meetup. We had our first one earlier this year and got a lot of good feedback on that. And really our mission, as JC mentioned, is we think Atlanta should be the premier place to start a health IT business. There's all the right ingredients here, and I'm just trying to figure out how do we make those connections and discussions to make that happen. And so we got a great panel here. Dr. Jane Morgan, Ben McKeeby, Will Alesi, and Emory, Grady, and Piedmont represented. And so I'll let them go into their backgrounds here in a minute. But really today what I want to cover is three things. Just one, talking about problems and pain points in healthcare. How do you uncover those, and what are some hot topics right now? Second, going through how do you execute that innovation? It's one thing to find the problem, but it's another thing to actually go do something to solve it. And how do you think through that? And lessons learned there. And then lastly, back to the Atlanta ecosystem, what are some opportunities and challenges for health systems to connect with entrepreneurs, with vendors, with others to work together to solve problems? So that's where we're going to go today. Thanks again for coming. And so just to start off, maybe we'll go down the line a quick why you got into healthcare and what your current role is today. Jane, you want to start?
My name is Jane Morgan. I am a cardiologist by training. Worked at Solvay Pharmaceuticals for many years, leading their R&D development after practicing for many years. I then went to Abbott, where I transitioned into devices. I worked in cardiovascular devices and worked on the MitraClip team, if anyone is familiar with the structural heart disease space. Developing really the MitraClip in Europe, where we were expanding its indication. And in the US, we really were behind Europe 2 or 3 years in the structural heart disease space, and looking really to narrow our indication and satisfy panels here. I have worked at Piedmont Hospital for the last 4 years. I went there to lead their cardiovascular research program, which we expanded very rapidly, developing a feasibility program. And in the last 14 months, I was appointed as their Director of Innovation and Research Development. And so it's in this role and this capacity that I'm here today to speak with you.
Great, thanks Jane. Ben?
Hi, Ben McKeeby. Prior to Grady, I was a technology consultant with PricewaterhouseCoopers. Kind of went across industries, but started gravitating towards healthcare. For me, a lot of connection and purpose with healthcare. Was looking to get into operations and really own it end to end. So started looking in the provider space. At the time, Grady was going through a pretty massive transformation. They were looking for new IT leadership, and that's how I ended up at Grady. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I became Chief Information Officer.
So Will Alesi, I'm the director of the Emory Healthcare Innovation Hub. When I was in undergrad, my last year, my grandfather was terminal. And at the end of his life, one doctor said, you have 12 hours to live. Another one said, you have 2 weeks to live. And no one's got an expiration date on the bottom of their foot, so that's understandable. But he had a primary care doc, a gastroenterologist, an oncologist, and a surgical oncologist. Each one came into his room at a different point in time and gave him a completely different treatment option for care. Ranging from the PCP saying, look, the wolf's at the door, what are we doing? Pretty much telling him to, it's time to cash the chips in. To the surgical oncologist saying, look, we need to get you on the operating table, and everything in between. And this is a man, he's a professor, but zero medical training at all. And so he sent everyone home so that he could spend one of his last nights on Earth. Oh, by the way, I'm not trying to bring the mood down. Realizing that, I was like, oh God, what a terrible way to start a morning. He sent everyone home, and he sat there and just tried to mull it over in his head. What's the right option, right? And I saw it and I was like, man, this isn't unethical, but it's just wrong. It's wrong that these people didn't, come with, as a unified front to really try to figure out what's the best option for this man, and let's, come with one message. And so I thought, that needs to be changed. I want to change that, and I haven't. But the last 6 years I was at Duke, where we had started the Duke Institute for Health Innovation back in September of 2013. And then, there was an opportunity at Emory. They were looking to stand up something very similar with the help of this group called Innovation Hub Enterprises, which is led by a guy by the name of James Lewis and Steve Gertz, where they stand these things up. But an opportunity to be on the Emory side, help interface with leadership to what we're going to talk about, try to uncover the problems, but also act as that interface to help break down the barriers to really drive innovation within the ecosystem.
Great. Well, thanks, Will. So to that point, maybe let's start with uncovering the problems. So in the startup world, we talk a lot about the customer discovery process and really understanding what are the pain points, what's a must-have problem before you dive into the solution. Maybe just talk for a minute about how do you uncover problems in the health system? Is it a formal process? Is it informal? A little bit of both? How do you think about that?
And so I'll start. I think the healthcare system is very interesting. It's a different animal. And I'll speak from a Piedmont perspective. We're a private, not-for-profit hospital. One of the things that, probably all hospitals, but certainly a not-for-profit hospital, is looking for are safety issues. Anything that could be a safety issue is generally a pain point. We look for areas where what we call sort of masking tape, where staff and other people within the hospital have developed workarounds for systems to get them to work. I think one of the things that all hospital systems are moving towards is more of a systemization and a processing. And if we can provide development and provide innovation that helps to systemize, that helps with the concatenation, linking one thing to the next, such that we can remove error and reduce hospital error and hospital induced error, that's always a huge pain point, a great seller, and a big entree into the hospital if you're able to positively impact what the outcome will be for patients with regard to hospital injuries. And as we know, hospital injuries actually are as the number 3 cause of death in the United States. And for the first time last year, hospital-induced injuries were listed as a non-disease cause of death, and it's number 3 in the United States. So it's a serious issue, and generally it arises from these pain points, these workarounds, technology that works to a certain point, and then we have to develop workarounds, and we have various systems. And so that's always an interesting avenue, and an avenue in which you immediately get executives' attention if you can come in and begin to address these issues.
Great. So one follow-up question there. You mentioned safety and patient stuff being front and center there. How do you get that feedback from the employees to know they should go to you or your group to bring forward ideas, versus you also going out and talking to folks in the hospital and gathering ideas as well? How does that feedback process work?
And so I think we're all learning at the same time. So Piedmont has developed an Office of Innovation. I am the first person to lead that Office of Innovation. I think you'll see throughout many areas of Atlanta, including this Atlanta Tech Village, everything is starting to hub at the same time. And so we're all learning simultaneously. And so currently there probably are multiple avenues in which this information comes in through the hospital via Civ. However, as time goes on, it will all channel probably through your innovation office. Currently, it comes in through our quality assurance, our safety officers, through executives, but eventually that will start to tunnel into one avenue, one pool, and we'll have sort of one depot of information. And I think, just as we're all representing here, we're sort of all growing and developing and maturing at the same rate. And I think we see that at Piedmont as well.
Great, thanks.
So we probably, a couple different ways I think things kind of come to us, or we go get them. So from a technology standpoint, we heavily kind of partner with clinicians and operational folks for things to kind of come bottom up or sideways. We also do have a day in the life program, so technology folks will go out and spend a day with various parts of the organization, either helping them do their job or shadowing, just to really see where maybe there's areas that we can help them improve. And then kind of top down, we have a pretty robust strategic planning process, so things will make their way down from that strategic planning process as well. Something we're rolling out pretty soon as well is housewide. We're calling it operational rounding, so a lot of the leaders will go out and do various operational rounding, and things will come in through that mechanism as well.
Yeah, I would agree. There's structured mechanisms in which you try to uncover a problem. There's also unstructured mechanisms. So some of the more unstructured mechanisms are just from going out and meeting as many faculty and staff as you can, and just trying to say, hey, what on a day-to-day basis is just really annoying to you? What are problems that you've experienced day in and day out that you still wonder, why is this a problem? And trying to uncover those. Certainly there are more structured mechanisms, so I agree with Ben. We do also have a strategic plan. So, but really what that gives you are more like thematic areas, not necessarily like specific problem statements, right? So there's a lot of work that needs to go into uncovering. If someone says, hey, population health and analytics is a strategic focus of us, well, in what areas, right? What does that look like? What are we trying to do as an institution? Improving the customer experience. Well, there's a lot of ways in which it's broken in healthcare. So, what are the exact pain points that you're hearing? I was meeting with the chief medical officer of the Emory Clinic yesterday, who I love, and I just had an informal conversation with her, and one thing she brought up is, the consumer experience, from parking to checking in, to knowing exactly where you need to go. There's just a lot of opportunity at Emory right now. And so, how do we kind of catalyze the problems and bring in either entrepreneurs or big multinational companies to figure out, instead of just, having a wayfinding solution, can we come up with something that's more all-encompassing, that takes care of, parking, makes that easier, takes care of checking in, so you're not answering the same 5 questions every time you come to clinic. But really just making the whole experience and how we engage with people frictionless, because no one wants to go to the medical center. So how do we make it as painless as possible so that people keep engaging with us as opposed to any of the other competitors?
So that's a good point on the thematic elements as well out there, right? Whether it be population health or AI or consumer experience that are very broad, right? There's a lot of different ways you can go and apply that. How do you all think through what are some of those key thematic areas for you? And then as you were starting to go down that path, Will, how do you dig in? So if you get a mandate that says we want to improve customer experience or population health or whatever it is, how do you dig down and where do you go to get to that next level?
So when it comes to population health, it is a buzzword of sorts. But I think the approach is really twofold. One, what are the patient populations that it really makes sense to become a lot more targeted in gathering data from them when they're not face-to-face in front of us, right? So for us, we all know that the average patient spends about 3 hours face-to-face in front of clinicians. That leaves 8,500 hours that they're at home, at work, in the community, at church, mosque, synagogue, wherever. And so if we're gonna not only take responsibility for a population, but be held accountable to their outcomes, we have to be able to collect data. And so I think for us right now, to be completely honest, it's probably less about figuring out what are the disease states that we want to go after, and more thinking about what are the capabilities that are going to help us be successful. So that's why we started a pilot with a company called Onduo, which is a diabetes management company, because we think that being able to collect data from patients when they're not face-to-face in front of us, but having that back-end care management support to know what to do with those patients so that our physicians aren't being inundated is something that we think, could certainly, if we can learn a lot, that can scale. I can't actually remember the question, but I do want to say one other thing, and it's that, when you look at the finances, finances can be interesting in healthcare. You may see positive contribution margins, but if you really dig down to the exact, payer group or patient population, you may uncover that, hey, there's a real, need for improvement and an opportunity to innovate.
Yeah, so I want to come back actually to the how do you quantify and dig down to that in a second, but maybe Ben or Jane, any thoughts on any big thematic elements that you're concerned about, at your respective systems, as well as how do you dig down to get below that thematic element into something?
Yeah, so whether it's quality or patient experience or more consumerism, I think it's just kind of getting a team together to talk about, what are we really trying to solve for, and then as you work through it, I mean, you realize, if I'm thinking about innovation, it means obviously we're talking about technology for the most part, but there's all sorts of innovation, whether it's for us, clinical innovation, and Dr. Khalifa and some of the things they're doing, or process innovation and things like that. So, I think we just try to get a group together that's going to be able to work through it, and as you work through it, you identify areas that either can help drive or enable the team or the group that is trying to tackle something. And so you may not know out of the gate exactly what you're after, but you realize that for us, we have limited resources, right? So we're going to look for a solution like an AI kind of predictive analytics that can tell us who's highly likely to be readmitted, so we can focus our limited resources on that subset of the population, because we just don't have the resources to do everything for every single patient. And so it really allows you to focus and go about it that way.
And to that point, do you, as you're making decisions of where to spend your limited resources, right, which is a challenge, right? How do you decide? Do you go after, we need to do something in this space, we don't know what yet, it's more of a research project, versus we only go after projects that we've already defined and have a specific outcome or target, or is it a little bit of both?
It's probably a little bit of both, honestly. We don't, we're honestly, I'm looking to put a little bit more structure around some of this stuff, so it's a little bit of everything, honestly, right now. But so we don't always follow a consistent approach.
Yeah. And then Jane, maybe from your perspective, any big thematic elements? You mentioned a little bit about safety, but any other big thematic elements? And then how do you drill down to get the solutions within this?
One of the things we should keep in mind is that as hospitals and the medical system moves away from revenue-based care to value-based care, that is probably an opportunity where a lot of positive input can be made. Because what the hospital systems are going to grapple with is the payer mix. So your payer mix of commercial payers versus Medicare payers versus private payers. In the Atlanta area, what we've seen in the last 5 years is that payer mix has started to shift more towards the Medicare population and away from the commercial population, which means less revenue for the hospital systems. And so how can you maximize this Medicare population as we move towards a value-based care? So one lump sum of money per diagnosis, as opposed to now we charge per procedure, per blood draw, per et cetera. As we move forward, there will be one pot of money in a value-based care system per diagnosis. And so that we will be incentivized to take care of that patient in the most effective and efficient manner possible. Because the more tests that we have, we're not billing for them, there's still only that one area of money. And so this is a huge opportunity. What we also will see is that as the Medicare population expands and our commercial payer mix decreases, hospitals also will grapple with funding. And so innovation and technologies that can impact that and help to manage that onslaught of where we know we are heading also have a great deal of value and could potentially put you more at the front of the line when we're trying to get an entree into the healthcare system, because these are problems, real problems with which we're grappling and with which we know we're heading and will need to deal with.
Yeah, and to that point, I think that something that we can all probably do a whole lot better on is teeing up for all of you. What exactly are those problems that we're looking to solve and that are high on our list? One of the other structuring mechanisms that Dr. Khalifa talks about a lot, and we're going to start a structured process around, is going department by department and asking both faculty and staff what are the problems that they think that need to be solved, and then going back to the strategic plan and asking them at a high level, whether it's population health, how do you define it and what are the problems that you see that would prevent us from achieving the aims of population health, right? Because an orthopedic surgeon is probably going to define that a lot differently than an endocrinologist, but that's fine to me because they're uncovering problems that need to be solved. But I think that from an Emory standpoint, at least, we're thinking about putting a real structure around the problem identification part, so that it's going to be a whole lot more clear to people, both internally, what are we looking to solve, but also externally.
So to that point, let's maybe move a little more into the operational side of, now you've done some of the discovery, you've got a couple problems or key initiatives you're working on. First question is, how do you start to, Ben, you mentioned bringing teams together. How do you think about bringing those teams together to solve the problems? Is it all internal teams? Is it folks on the front line? Is it more like a special projects or innovation group? Do you look to vendors or outside help? How do you think about starting to tackle your problems?
So I'll start. The way that we are currently structured, we're developing our structures to solve the problems, is that we have a combination of internal and external sources. Obviously, Piedmont, as the other hospital systems, very strong in clinical expertise. We really don't need to go outside for that, but we might need to go outside for other types of expertise. So we'll build our team based on our strengths and then begin to feed in those areas that we may not have. So we may not be as strong, say, in engineering, although we have quite a few process engineers, but then we'd bring that part into our team. We may need specific legal support or software support. So our team would be a combination, and we look for sort of just the best people, and we identify the problem and work to build the problem, work to solve the problem. We do that currently with our internal IP. As physicians and APPs and other staff develop IP, they come to the Office of Innovation, and then we work in sort of that networked team to develop these ideas up towards licensing and commercialization as we start to build out our incubator. And so far we have 3 active projects in our incubator, looking at 5 or 6 others, and this is a team effort with many people within the city of Atlanta. So within the system of Piedmont and also within the city of Atlanta. We sort of all work together to build this ecosystem that we have here.
That's great. And then just to clarify sort of the incubator you're describing, maybe talk just a minute more about that. Is that more just to solve specific problems within Piedmont, or you mentioned a little bit of commercialization as well as part of the incubator's goal to not only solve a problem with Piedmont, but then commercialize that or spread that beyond?
And so our incubator is a little more selfish than that. We don't solve any problems. People get to come with their free ideas, whatever's on their mind, whatever they want to do, whatever they've thought about. It doesn't have to have anything to do with Piedmont. It does need to positively impact patient care and health care. And then we work and partner with our employees to develop that brain trust through whatever the process is, phase 0, phase 1, all the way through phase 4, customer discovery. So we work to do that, and those are the types of projects that are in our incubator. They are not solving problems for Piedmont. These are people's original ideas that they come and Piedmont helps to foster and develop them.
Great.
It can happen, I think, a couple different ways. Sometimes we gather the internal team first and figure out what skill sets we need to augment. From a technology standpoint, we don't do a whole lot of in-house development, so we're gonna go to the market for that, whether it's a startup or entrepreneur or established kind of partners we already have. So we have a variety of those that we've done. And then, honestly, sometimes we don't even know we have the problem or there is a problem. Somebody brings the problem to us, that company or that person will then form around that, right? If we agree, yes, this is something we want to embark on, or that would make sense for us. So, it doesn't always necessarily start internally, and then we go search for it. Sometimes things find us.
The problems that exist in healthcare, we can't, any of us, solve alone, right? So we definitely need entrepreneurs or companies to help come in and bring the latest technology and devices, know-how, capital to help solve some of these. And the Emory Healthcare Innovation Hub is funded through corporate strategic partners. But initially, your question was around how do you actually operationalize something? And so there really is an art of socialization within a health system. You have to socialize the mess out of stuff. So one is identifying the problem, and some of those can be top down, or some of them can be from a faculty member. And then we can do our own due diligence to really dig down and understand, either from the finances or from quality and safety, what really is the problem. But then some of our faculty members, it can be both and. Some of our faculty members can have their own ideas and solutions that may be just workflow innovations. Others may require bringing in a new technology or a new care model that's supported by technology from a company. But once you find out what the solution is, getting buy-in from everyone that's going to touch that new workflow is critically important. And letting them believe that and take ownership of that new workflow and to see it as kind of their idea, is critical to being able to break down the barriers that exist in driving innovation in the system.
Yeah, so to that point, I've felt those challenges. I'm sure you all have as well. The challenge of getting the medical side on board, that it makes sense from a medical perspective, as well as the business side on board, and then ultimately the patient side as well. How do you balance those of, you have ideas where the medical side wants to push it, but the business side's more hesitant, or vice versa. The business wants to push it, but the medical side says, How do you break through some of those, or do you just, those are too complex, move on to the next thing? How do you balance those?
That's tough. That's really tough. If the business side is putting a hard stop on something, that's a hard challenge to overcome. I'm just going to be honest. If that happens, you really have to take it way up the chain in leadership to say, look, do we want to pilot this? I think that's the other thing is, showing everyone that we're not trying to roll any of this stuff out into production. We want to pilot it small. Have a robust measurement and evaluation methodology to really figure out what was the clinical utility and economic utility of doing this. And then whatever the results are that, we then take back to the business side to say, look, these are the results. Can you afford not to continue doing this? Or can you afford to continue doing it? So, but if there's a real, people are butting heads from the clinical side and the business side, I don't know, that's kind of a recipe for having a really long sales cycle.
So maybe I'll ask Jane, being a cardiologist yourself, how do you balance when business puts forth an idea and from a medical side, you're not a big fan of it?
Right, and in my position, I would be on both sides, both the business and the medical side. I think a good point is made here by our panel. You have to have a champion of it within the system. The systems are just too complicated to get anything through without a real champion, and that's an internal, influential champion within your system who's willing to work and move it forward. One of the things we have to be concerned about, certainly within the health system, which is why legal and business entities are often involved, is we run into the Stark Law, we run into anti-kickback laws. There are, multiple exceptions. We have to figure out which exception perhaps will qualify for any type of innovation, and all of these become complicating matters, and then it begins to be a conversation of do we want to invest this amount of time into it? And so our legal team only has a certain amount of time. We have other issues to manage. Our business team has a certain amount of time. Our clinical team has a certain amount of time. So when we begin to run head first into Stark laws and into anti-kickback laws, we have to begin to search out exceptions, begin to figure out how, if we determine that this is something that we're interested in, how can we make it work without having liability to the system that requires a great deal of resource internally, and how do we reorganize that resource? And so we must have a champion that is going to move that through, and I think you brought up a great point in that the champions oftentimes need to be plural in more than one area of the hospital, especially, we represent very large hospital systems. One single person isn't going to do it for you, and so it's fairly complex. And so those are some of the many considerations just to think about.
So I'll jump over to Will. You mentioned the word pilot, and I think everybody who's been in healthcare has very strong opinions of pilots. Maybe just spend a few minutes talking about, from your view, what makes a successful pilot? Like, when you've seen those that have worked, why have they worked? Or when you've seen many pilots that have gone nowhere, why? Mainly some lessons learned to entrepreneurs who are oftentimes trying to get pilots with hospital systems.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that entrepreneurs definitely want pilots. Anytime I talk to VCs, it seems like they don't want their portfolio companies just getting piloted to death, which I can appreciate. But I think one thing is, I mentioned it at the beginning, a lot of people find this allure of doing innovation and piloting, or not piloting something, but you're just getting something off the ground, and don't think through what is that, I know this is not a fun topic, but what is that measurement and evaluation? What are the metrics that we are going to hold this pilot to, so that at the end of it, we can go back and say, look, because of this, you can't afford not to scale it. Or you go to another, hopefully it's not a pilot, you're going to a potential customer and saying, because of these results, you can't afford not to implement this. So I think one, for a successful pilot, it's doing a lot of the pre-work on the beginning to put together that measurement and evaluation methodology that people would buy into down the road. Successful pilots, I think it all goes back to the workflow and nailing out all of those details. The ones that I've seen that have been unsuccessful just kind of bypassed who's actually going to be dealing with this from a care management standpoint, nursing standpoint. And if you don't get buy-in from all levels, it's going to be marginally successful at best.
Yeah, some of what I've seen is just that it's you may have some buy-in, but if you don't have the folks on the ground that are really going to work with you through those iteration cycles, that's where you're going to see it really add value. And so you just need to make sure that you have the dedicated, allocated time from the various groups that are going to have to put in the time to get to that end result, and understanding the context of the health system and what their priorities are, what they're dealing with, and a lot of that's on that influencer or that champion to do the behind the scenes work, right? So there's a lot of pre-meetings before the meeting, right? That you're one-on-one with your CFO or whoever, that you need to anticipate what some of those barriers are going to be. So if there's not a clear ROI, which sometimes there's not, if you're talking true innovation, it's you want to tie it to more goal, but sometimes you don't get there right out of the gate, and so there's going to be failures, and you have to learn from those. You can't one of the things is kind of moving too quickly from a failure. Showing that you've learned various lessons from that failure and applying it to the next thing.
In my experience, the most successful pilots are those that have been able to align themselves with the brand of the healthcare organization. And whatever that brand is, if you've taken the time to research it and understand it, and you can present and develop a pilot that aligns with the goals and the trajectory and the strategic vision of the branding of that facility, then that really leads to success and rapid buy-in into that. Every hospital system has a different brand, that is trying to achieve, and so if you can tap into that and understand what that is and where the CEO is trying to take the facility and the hospital system, and your pilot can align with that, then you have much more rapid adoption throughout the system.
Makes sense. So just a couple more questions, then we'll open up to Q&A here. So from as you're describing, right, I'm sure you get hit up all the time with entrepreneurs wanting to do pilots and et cetera, et cetera. What advice do you have for entrepreneurs of what is the right way to engage with a health system, whether they have an idea or they're trying to solve a pain point? What could they do differently or better to engage with health systems?
I would say have a very compelling story. I'm sure each of us kind of get pitched a lot, and some people are truly solving problems that exist in healthcare, but they're problems that are just kind of on the margins, on the fringes, right? So, I think telling a good story and telling why people in a healthcare delivery system need to care about this problem and why your solution is the one that has the secret sauce to fix that problem, and why you're the right team to do it, and why we should be doing this today and not 3 years ago or 5 years from now. I just see a lot of people that come in and try to convince me on a problem that it just doesn't register. It just doesn't make sense. And so I think that would be my main advice.
I think while sometimes being removed from the system definitely helps kind of create creative problem solving, but I do think you need the partner or the mentor within a system as well to maybe hone your message and really understand is that a true problem, or are there other things to consider as well. As far as the mechanism to get in, honestly, it's not always it's personal relationships, or it's networking, or it's being where your customer is, right? That's how a lot of these things happen. I mean, we get inundated with calls and emails, and quite frankly, it's just not. We don't have the bandwidth to intake all that. So most of the successful ones, it's usually a warm introduction, or they've met a clinician or somebody else in operations brings it to technology as well, and it starts that way. We do have through our purchasing organization, they do host events. That is a possibility as well, where they host events on how to do business with Grady, for whether it's startups or established companies or diverse companies, and so that is a mechanism as well. And so you'll come in and talk to them, and then purchasing usually tries to push you towards the area to see if there's any interest or gauge interest. But the most successful ones I've seen generally come through a connection, or it's resonated with somebody, and it's introduced that way. But I think it was mentioned, but we could do a better job at releasing a problem statement or something like that, and to gauge, because a lot of it's dependent on the person, right? I mean, you're scanning, okay, I have this problem, are there solutions out there already, or do I partner with somebody to develop that solution? So there's definitely mechanisms too that we could come up with that would be a better intake process, I guess, and to that kind of thing.
And I agree with everyone up here, and I would just add just good old-fashioned customer discovery. Know your customer, understand what the priorities are of that healthcare system. There's no need to come in with diabetes software if diabetes hasn't been identified as one of the priorities of the system. There's only a finite amount of funding that's allocated to various things within the system, and if a system is looking at patient experience and safety and transcatheter valve technology, perhaps coming in with a neurologic solution is not the best pairing for that health system. And so not a good use really of anyone's time. I do agree that a compelling story often is an avenue to get in, and maybe is something that people within the system haven't thought about, and maybe is not a priority, but if the story is good enough, it's something that will be considered. But I think if you're looking for lower hanging fruit, understand your customer. Take some time to do customer discovery. We represent 3 different health systems. We probably have 3 different strategic directions, probably have 3 different sets of priorities. Everything that you come won't be a panacea for all 3 of us. Understand who you're talking with and what the priorities are for that system. Opens the doors much more quickly and aligns you with the goals of that organization.
Great point on customer discovery. We're always a big fan of doing that. So last question, then open up to Q&A. What else can Atlanta do to help connect the healthcare ecosystem here to further support building and growing businesses in Atlanta?
So I'll just start. I would love to see Atlanta, the Chamber of Commerce, the governor's office. We need to start to really attract big pharma, to have not necessarily headquartered here, but to have significant presence here of our pharma companies, of our device companies, of our technology companies where they're looking to build other hubs. I don't see Atlanta putting enough effort into being a high-profile destination for these companies to come, such that we really can begin to build the ecosystem. I'm not saying that any of us can solve that, but within the government, I would like to see Atlanta be a much more attractive place when Amazons are looking to place a second hub, when Google is looking to place a second hub, and Medtronic is looking for a place to put its offices, that Atlanta is the go-to place to have that, such that we can continue to build this burgeoning ecosystem and we can all interconnect and work together.
You know, maybe, and maybe this exists, and I just don't know about it, but maybe a healthcare specific demo day type, or multiple, right? You don't do it all in a day, but you know, if you think about, we all have a limited capacity and time, but if it's obviously if it's a little more efficient and everything's kind of in one place, and it's short cycles of demos, or you know, some type of central repository of what people are working on in the startup community or entrepreneurs for us to even go find it, right? So, so maybe something to that effect. I mean, I know they do you know, pitch nights here, and not necessarily healthcare, but you know, something maybe on a bigger scale, or a, you know, a day event every so often.
Yep. Well, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just keep it to kind of what's in this room. Yeah, I think we can, as we've said multiple times, like we can do a much better job of, you know, probably surveying throughout the organization to tee up very concrete problem statements that we're looking for people to solve. But then, you know, and this is something that, you know, myself and AT have talked about, and you know, I talked about with Ben right before this, but you know, maybe we could you know, pitch some of those problem statements in great detail to entrepreneurs to say, hey, look, this is a problem. If you can come up with a solution that makes sense, we will absolutely validate it. You know, maybe we can kind of in this room, you know, work towards something like that, where we're doing, you know, the problem discovery on our end, but then come to you saying, hey, here's the problem. Maybe we do it, in a pretty intensive way, giving you kind of the problem from like a clinical standpoint, but also from an administrative standpoint, so you fully understand the issue. And then say, hey, you all go back, and y'all are the smart ones that have the entrepreneurial zeal and know-how. So come back to us with what you think, and maybe that could be part of a demo day where we select and say, hey, this makes sense. And we'll spend the resources needed to run the validation. So, I don't know. I mean, that's not something that's happening tomorrow, but I can't get any more macro than just kind of what's in this room, and it just kind of seems to make sense.
Great. Well, thanks so much for taking the time. We open it up to Q&A. We got about 10 minutes for Q&A. So, pass.
Good morning, my name is Stephanie. I just wanted to follow up with what you said as a strategy. There's currently something similar to what you're thinking of for a demo day. At the airport, they do it once a year with ATL Thinks. So they have like an initial day where they kind of say the problems that they're looking for, they narrow the scope of the problems. Entrepreneurs come in and pitch their ideas. They select like their favorite 5, 6, 7, and then like 2 months later, those companies then pitch and somebody wins. So maybe that might be a good kind of model to follow. And it works for the airport because they implement one winner per year.
I mean, if you have a connection there, I'd be more than happy to meet and learn more.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
Hi, my name is Soumya. We had some comments on Dr. Morgan indicated that her health system was moving more towards figuring out how to extract, how to deliver better results from it for patients, especially given that payers are moving more towards Medicare is becoming the more prominent payer. I was curious, given that 20% of the U.S. population has high deductible insurance, how do you guys, to what degree is value-based care delivery a focus to individual payers and to employer-owned plans that are also growing?
So I'll just ask for one verification. You said 20% of what? I didn't understand you.
I read a statistic that said 20% of the U.S. population has high deductible insurance plans, so like they're paying $2,000 to $5,000 deductible, and so they're more inclined to go for a value on the price point.
Right, and I think part of that as we shift towards value-based care, will be encapsulated into that. And it's not just for the hospital systems and for the doctors and providers, but it's also for the patients. It remains to be seen, how this will actually mature and what will actually, how it will actually be implemented and how it will actually be operationalized. But as we move towards that, the same will be seen in these patients and all of our patients, ourselves as well, and our deductibles and what we're paying out of pocket.
Yeah, and for us, we don't technically, we're not in a lot of value-based contracts yet with the payers, but we're definitely moving in that direction, and that's why we're doing the population health strategies to really manage, whether it's by disease cohort or a different cohort. And so, even though we're not technically in some of those arrangements, we're already preparing for that. But then on the flip side, like you said, the consumer isn't part of that with patients having a higher deductible. We're always looking for how to make that care more convenient, because that's how people are going to shop, right? Convenience, transparency. So you're going to, I think, see a lot more price transparency coming up as well, because they're going to shop, just like you said, for the best value. And so they're going to look at the ratings, they're going to look at how much it costs, and so we have to do our best to be in front of that and really create an experience for them that engages them, and then also just satisfies their various needs and is personalized to them.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, what he said, even in a traditional fee-for-service environment, though, you can always make the case that we should be focusing on these types of things, right? Because certainly there's people sitting on the general medicine floor that really don't need to be there, and we need to be thinking about better ways to get them out of the hospital. But certainly from like just a consumer experience standpoint, I mean, creating that, I don't know if I want to call it like brand loyalty, but like people saying, Emory is an efficient place that, makes education easy in terms of what I should be doing, what I shouldn't be doing. I mean, I think that's gonna, play into everyone's hand in the long run.
So given overall margins are decreasing for hospitals across the U.S., just curious to hear if you guys are getting budget pressure on outsourced spend for technology vendors. Whether it's innovation, whether it's overall IT spend, just curious if that's kind of good or bad for you guys.
There's always, in technology, we're primarily a cost center. Obviously, we can't help drive top line, but generally speaking, in a true sense, we're a cost center. So yeah, that's one of the things we're always focusing on is optimizing and reducing our costs. And so we, like any other industry or anybody else, if there's a better, faster, cheaper way to do it, then and if it involves outsourcing, then absolutely. And so you're absolutely right. I mean, it's, for us, we're heavy government, Medicare, Medicaid. Our commercial mix isn't quite as high as some of the other systems, and so we do have margin pressures for sure, being a safety net, and so we always have to look for ways to be more efficient in what we do. So, but sometimes that it may not be truly outsourcing; it just may be partnering with technology to allow our resources to in operations to operate more effectively as well.
Hello, my name is Andre, and my question is small business innovative research pertaining particularly to the National Science Foundation. What is your participation in that program, and how do we as startups go down that process with you all?
Sorry, what program? Just NSF's like?
The Small Business Innovative Research Program.
SBI. Oh yeah.
SBIR.
Yeah.
And particularly National Science Foundation, and I say that because it deals a lot of with the technology and analytics side companies.
I mean, right now I'm not involved in any SBIR grants or trying to push those through. However, I'm very interested in partnering with people that are solving like real problems. There's actually a wound care company. It's not even in Atlanta. It's in Miami, where they've created some sensors that they think can be a real game changer. In fact, the technology was NSF funded, but right now they just have a couple of prototypes and need enough to build enough of these sensors within Gauze to do a proper clinical trial, which is kind of needed right now. So for that, I am talking to them about potentially going in and doing an SBIR. But I mean, I don't have to be honest, I don't have a structured mechanism that I think through that. But we have the Coulter program at Emory that is highly successful, and they have a lot of those connections.
Maybe one more question.
Yeah, we've got one more here.
Hey, Justin, I just wanted to see, I know you guys all mentioned that understanding the customer was a really big piece for you guys. And I think a good way to do that is like a reverse pitch almost. And so I was just gonna ask if there's one thing right now that you're really excited about, or that you think technology could fix, or just that comes to the top of your mind. There's a room full of entrepreneurs here. Many times we need that idea to vet out, what right now is it?
I mean, for me personally, just because our leadership is very interested in the consumer experience, right? That whole check-in process, just making it very seamless. Obviously, that's something that I'm very interested in because they're very interested in it. From a personal standpoint, I think anything that's kind of a hospital at home type of a model, whether it's digital therapeutics or creating more of a seamless, because right now things are very one-off, when you think about wearables or sensors or any of these other kinds of things. But, solutions where you can gather that information and tee it up to care managers where it's very clear and easy for them to know what is the intervention, what is the task that we need to do. I think companies that can play in that space is something I'll personally help to drive through the organization.
I'll say two things. Maybe patient experience, that patient-facing, consumer-facing side. I don't necessarily have a specific, but just the keep getting and keeping our patients engaged in their care to help supplement what we do in the health system. And then maybe secondly, more internally focused ideas and thoughts around kind of that robotic process automation in regards to the operation of our facility. So ways to integrate that and allow our folks, whether to do higher value tasks. Basically.
I would say probably medical devices as well as instrumentation needed to insert these medical devices. Always an avenue via which there is a lot of room to grow, and people are very receptive. We're always looking for the most optimized outcomes for our patients with the least amount of morbidity. And so if we can continue to improve, innovate, or develop medical devices that are permanent, that are developed to be permanent internal structures within the human body, as well as the instrumentation via which to place those and via which physician operators can easily maneuver those instruments for optimal placement and optimal patient outcomes, that's always an area.
Great. Well, thank you so much, panelists, for coming today and speaking, and thank you for everybody coming here today. We'll put up here some of our next events. Our next healthcare one will probably be towards the end of April. But again, we'll be around here afterwards for any questions, and thanks again, everybody, for coming.